Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Connie Butler, Chief Curator here at the Hammer Museum, and I want to welcome you all tonight for Kerry Tribe's talk. Kerry's work is part of the Hammer Contemporary Collection, which we launched in 2005 to build a collection of international contemporary art made since 1960, with a special focus on Los Angeles-based artists, works on paper, and international video. Our growing collection includes a large number of drawings, photographs, but also includes painting, sculpture, and media arts. We've paid particular attention to works by artists from Southern California, which is the context for tonight in some ways. And in March, as many of you know, the Hammer unveiled our new building expansion, and we decided to present works from our collection to inaugurate our new spaces. The current exhibition, Together in Time, occupies nearly all of our existing gallery spaces and is the largest presentation of the Hammer Contemporary Collection in our museum's history. It's very fitting that Kerry Tribe, an artist who's been an important part of the museum for many years, is featured in this exhibition. Actually, her work just came down on Sunday, but has been featured in the exhibition, and we're thrilled to have her here with us tonight. I want to mention that we'll also have a talk with several other artists in the exhibition this summer. And before I mention them, I just want to also add that Kerry is a wonderful and valued member of our Artist Council, which is a really important kind of advisory board here at the Hammer, too. So as far as other talks, Diedrich Brackens will speak next Tuesday, June 13th, Roberto Gildamontes on Thursday, June 29th, Mariah Garnett and Galare Koshgaran on July 12th, and Willie Birch on Tuesday, July 18th. Each of these talks will include Hammer curators as well, and I hope you'll come back and join us for some of them. Kerry Tribe is an interdisciplinary artist and filmmaker based here in LA. She's known for her expansive and profound works in film and video and mixed media. Her practice explores elusive aspects of human consciousness, including memory, love, and doubt. And she's very interested in science, especially neuroscience, as well as philosophy. Kerry's work addresses processes of thought and their relationship to subjectivity, narrative, place, and time. She plays with the gaps between perception, cognition, and memory, exposing the fluidity and ultimate unreliability of each. Some of her recent projects consider text messaging within a family, the use of actors playing the roles of standardized patients, so-called standardized patients in medical training, and the interconnected ecologies of the Los Angeles River. Tribe's work has been the subject of solo presentations at the Wellcome Collection in London, the Cantor Art Center, and the Anderson Collection at Stanford University, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane, Australia, and the Power Plant in Toronto. Her films have been screened at the International Film Festival in Rotterdam, the New York Film Festival, and the BFI London Film Festival, among many others. Her works are also held in collections including MoMA, the Whitney, SF MoMA, LACMA, the Getty Museum, the SMAC Museum in Ghent, the Generali Foundation, and of course, here at the Hammer, where we showed her really beautiful Aphasia Poetry Project video, which she's going to talk about tonight, among other works. She's a recipient of the Presidential Residency at Stanford University, a Herb Alpert Award in Film and Video, the Creative Capital Award in Visual Art, and a USA Artists Award. She's received all of those. She received her MFA from UCLA in 2002 and was a fellow at the American Academy in Berlin and participated in the Whitney Independent Study Program. She's represented by the Gallery 1301 PE here in Los Angeles. So as far as the format tonight, we're going to hear a talk from Kerry about a number of works, and then she and I will have a conversation and take audience questions. Afterwards, we'll have some light refreshments in the theater lobby, so we invite you all to join us and we can talk more out there. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kerry Tribe. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. And I also would like to thank Shannon and Claudia, Connie. It's been really a pleasure to be here and to be included in this terrific exhibition. I'm going to talk some about the Aphasia Poetry Club, the project that has just been on view, and about 3 other projects. Actually, just to mention, this is a slide from a piece called The Last Soviet that was screened here at the Hammer in 2011 at an exhibition called All of This and Nothing. There's going to be a kind of, I think, maybe a little bit of a sentimental and somewhat retrospective vibe to this talk, especially because we have a smaller audience today, and I know some of you, so I feel comfortable being myself. This is a slide of an image of a bus bench that I made when I was in graduate school, and I realized that last spring marked 20 years since I graduated from UCLA. And the Hammer Museum and Connie Butler's work in particular have been touchstones for me throughout those decades. So I'll try to do 3 things in this talk. First, I want to talk about the Aphasia Poetry Club and unpack my approach and some of the motivating interests. Second, I want to extrapolate from that work my thinking about the uniquely human paradox of this kind of sense of self that we carry around with us. And then I thought it would make sense to trace that paradox of self and selfing that we all do as a kind of theme through other projects in my practice. So I'll bring 3 examples of those. My work often begins with an idea from something that I learn about in the world, either through word of mouth or something I've read or heard about on the radio, and is then informed by a kind of elongated process of research, investigation, and experimentation. But it's not especially theoretical. It doesn't really happen from the top down. In other words, it's not like I read something that makes a lot of sense in explaining how the world works and turns me on, which I do, and then go, aha, I've got an idea for a project. I think my work more generates from the inside out, and usually at the beginning of a project, when there's that spark of an idea, the spark is something like, how do I want this to feel for an audience? What do I want this experience to be? And how can I make whatever material and formal properties of the resulting work, of the final project, perform something of that idea of the work in the kind of phenomenological embodied experiences of the viewer? And it's also informed, if I'm honest, by the understanding that we are all born, we all get sick. If we're lucky, we experience old age, and then we die. Everyone. Our consciousness is fragile, it's contingent, and it is not within our control. And when I was a kid and realized that at some point I would have to die, and I would have to go through that process alone, it scared the shit out of me. And I think that that's what brought me to a kind of interest in what you might call contemplative practices like meditation, recognizing that there are traditions, Buddhism being one of them, that looks square on, head on at this reality of the fleeting nature of life, the illusory nature of self, and the great mystery that is consciousness. So in meditation, we track our thoughts and our sensations in our body, and we spend extended periods of time in silence. And for me, at least, part of that process involves recognizing how deeply I value the relationships in my life, how much I really care about feeling close to other people, feeling connected. And that's hardwired in us, obviously. We are social animals. But I was also raised in a family and a culture that seriously prioritized control, education, articulation, language was very important. So the first project that I'll share is, of course, the Aphasia Poetry Club from 2015, which deals with the linguistic self. In a way, the Aphasia Poetry Club is about aphasia, but it's more about three particular unique individuals who all experience aphasia in different ways and for different reasons. And in this context, I think of it more as being about how we understand our own subjective cognitive processes and how we try to communicate to others a sense of who we are and who we feel we are on the inside. So the project for me is very much about the problem of other minds, the philosophical problem of other minds, and how we can know ever really what's going on in another mind. Aphasia is an impairment of language that affects the production or comprehension of speech, reading, or writing. It's caused by injury to the areas of the brain that are responsible for language production and reception. More people have aphasia than have MS or Parkinson's or muscular dystrophy or cerebral palsy. So it's probably the most common disability that you've never heard of. I'm kidding, because a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of aphasia, but really people, by and large, have not. And different regions of the brain can suffer damage, resulting in different aspects of consciousness that are altered, and in different ways. So neuroscientists talk about this as the cortical underpinnings of consciousness, that there are basically material parts of the brain that if you damage them, there are resulting alterations in behavior, consciousness, personality, etc. And I can wrap my head around that. But there's also what's called the hard problem of consciousness, Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness, which is kind of below that question. The idea that consciousness, sentience, the feeling that it's like anything at all to be experiencing from the first person perspective, arises quite mysteriously out of physical matter. Like, how is it that the same atoms that make up this pen, this cell phone, this computer, they're the same kind of atoms that make up you and me? Right now, those atoms are organized in such a way that I can sit here and talk to you. At some point, they no longer will be. To me, that's really kind of a mindfuck. So you damage different areas of the brain and different impairments result. But what of the you in the midst of all that? Are you still the same you if you think differently or if you communicate differently? And to me, this is where aphasia kind of creates a particularly interesting friction between philosophy and neuroscience. I received a grant from Creative Capital to make a project about aphasia, and I immediately started looking for support groups and places where people that might have the disorder would gather. And I found a group of people at the Cedars-Sinai Hospital, not that far from here, who'd been meeting for about 10 years. Most of them had experienced stroke or other traumatic brain injury, and started hanging out with them. And I showed them my work. This is them checking out a project called HM, which I'll show you a clip of later. And they said I became an honorary aphasic, and they were really great, and I loved hanging out with them. There was no pressure to be super articulate, which was a huge relief. And finally, one of them turned to me after probably a year and a half and said, you know, it's great having you here, but like, what are you doing? You know, what do you want? Do you like, should we do, like, you're an artist, should we do something with you? And that's what really led to the creation of the project that was on view here. This is an installation view of the original incarnation of the Aphasia Poetry Club at 356 Mission in 2015, which had a kind of trompe-l'oeil effect. So that wall that you're looking at has a space behind the wall, and what you see on that wall at moments of the film is actually the space behind it. The space behind it had a part of the exhibition that was not included here, sculptures and prints, primarily made up of the kind of building blocks of cinematic production. So there's C-stands and apple boxes and props, but they've all kind of been destabilized in some fundamental material way. So the C-stands start to loop and relate to each other and interconnect, and you know, maybe they begin to form something like letters or a kind of proto-alphabet. And the excerpt of the piece that I'd like to show now is the last 6 minutes. It's kind of like the climax. You'll hear from the three people with aphasia that narrate the film, Chris, Dale, and Laura. And you'll also hear a little, you'll hear my family and me singing backup when there's an animated sequence. So see if you can pick out my voice. It's a 28-minute film, and we'll watch a 6-minute excerpt.
We print film. We printed film. Published Cambodia. Print. Healthy.
My show is called The Lost Note. The setting is a magical land. We have a pond and a forest, an old watermill on the Bron. Just behind the woods, is Volcano. And inside that's coming up is all these little buildings of the musics. And you'll see little bees, and then you'll see butterflies, and you'll find little buds. There is a spider. There is a spider. He wants to help everyone make beautiful music together. Sometimes we go whack, and you go bing ba 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 ba.
Together, singing a song together, forging a bond that will last forever. Puzzles and bees, flowers and trees, soldier and child, whether you're timid or wild, everyone sings along here on Watermill Pond. Watermill Pond, Watermill Pond, Watermill Pond.
I can't speak, but I can sing. I have seen some awful things, but it's okay when we play beautiful music
Together, singing a song together, forging a bond that will last forever. Puzzles and bees, flowers and trees, soldier and child, whether you're
tried and tried to make my show, been to every studio, but all I ever hear is no. Now I found true friends. Every week we read our poems, and in the end, life goes on. It's a song that we sing together.
I want to get there. I want to try to get there. It's almost right there, but I can't get to it. It's almost there, but I can't get to it. But I try to get to it. Is that weird? I'm aphasic, and you're an artist, but we have a commonality of trying to express ourselves. That's what I think is common, is that it's the same. At least for me, that's why, I don't know, we entrust you to use you through it, because it's like 2 layers deep. But trying to get you, I don't know, even now, I know what I want to say, but I want to say it more eloquently and write it down or try to figure out all these ways. It's not coming the way I want to, but regardless, it's the same experience, right?
Thanks. So, as you can tell, there are 3 narrators that you never see, and their voices are accompanied by footage that's been edited and worked with in a way that tries to kind of perform something that tries to really match the cadence and the kind of nature of the way that each of these narrators speak. And I'll just say a little bit about each of them because they're really extraordinary people. The first is Christopher Riley, and those are his photographs that you see there in that installation view. He had an active career as an artist and a photographer when he had his first stroke in his early 40s. And in what Chris chose to talk about, which was really very powerful to me, was, this is someone who really struggles to form the words that he's thinking of and has tremendous optimism for the ability to stay present with experience as it's unfolding now in his current condition. So he says things like, stroke happened, so what? Happened twice, so what? And he means it, and I think that for some people, something can be gained when language is lost. I think things can get simplified a lot. I'm not trying to make light of the disability that Chris is dealing with, but he found a way in his participation in this project to show me, and I think the audience, a kind of continuity between things at the very, very micro, like atomic level, and the very macro level of stars and outer space and the solar system. And he speaks explicitly about what he thinks happens when you die. which I think is really beautiful about this kind of return that he describes. So that's Chris. And then there are the many lives of Dale Benson. And Dale is represented by 3 different sort of avatars in the film. First, a canary. He says that his mother was a Comanche painting and she could speak with birds. And he wanted to be represented as a canary in the project. And then after some time, he ended up in the Navy and went to Vietnam and did a number of tours in Vietnam as a Navy SEAL. And he becomes a SEAL. And during those tours, he would meet people in different villages who were very young and would grow up quickly. And when as he explained it, he'd come back on later tours and he would encounter the same kids, but now they had guns, and he would have to choose to shoot them or be shot by them. And he was really traumatized by that. And he came back from the war and he started working in Hollywood, and he worked as a producer in some capacity on a number of the Rocky films. And at that point, he's represented as a leech, appropriately enough. And we didn't, because he was familiar, I mean, and without going into too much, Dale really, really, really wanted to get a cartoon show off the ground after he had his stroke that would in some way kind of make up for, that's not the right way to say it, but that he felt would contribute positively to the world and to children's lives. And he really was obsessed with making a cartoon that involved music and children and singing and getting along and building community. And I said, well, I've got this grant. Why don't I make a little episode of your cartoon? And we'll do like my show in the main space, and we'll have your little cartoon on another channel in another space. And he said, no, I don't, that's not right. He ended up wanting it to be folded into it. But I think actually he just didn't want that dream of his to finally end. Like, that was his raison d'etre. Dale is going to make this show. So we did it. We made the show and folded it into our project. And we restaged Vietnam in 356 Mission. That's a production still. And then dear Laura Romero. She is in this project, I think, kind of, all of these people are incredibly creative, and I can identify with all of them, but Laura happens to, weirdly share my birthday. We have the same birthday. I felt like we had a lot in common. She had a very active life in business and was diagnosed with a condition called moya moya, which means puff of smoke. And so the arteries in her brain and leading to her brain periodically become obstructed, and she has strokes, lots of little strokes. And when she speaks quite clearly, but isn't always sure that what she's saying is what she's intended to say, so she'll often restate. And her footage follows that. So when Laura says, I was walking down the street and I fell into a bush, and I thought the bush was going sideways, but it wasn't, you see 3 different versions of the bush. And she also is able to describe aphasia in some detail and refers to the other people in the group and really to the sense that I had also about the significance of that interpersonal connection, staying connected, feeling the warmth that wasn't reliant on language. And that was really beautiful to me. And so I would start driving to the Cedars support group from the east side, because she lived in Glendale and I lived in Eagle Rock. And we'd have these great conversations in the car. And then one day I asked my assistant to come with us and record the conversation from the back seat. And she did, and I played it back, and there was nothing really there. I don't think we really talked about anything, but we really connected and talked about everything. So I don't know how that is, but it was quite inspiring. And I chose that section of the film to share with you because she also speaks to a common experience that some of us, I think artists in particular, have, of feeling like it's very hard sometimes to get what's on the inside out. And particularly as an artist, how do you know that this thing that you're making is going to land and is going to affect people the way you want it to? There's a great leap of faith, and you're kind of stumbling through. For me anyway, everything has a new form, and every project I feel like I'm stumbling in the dark a bit until until I find my footing. And it's not really until the audience has seen it and I've gotten some feedback that I know if I've really, like said what I meant to say. So I was very grateful for her saying that. And yeah, this is a talk that we did at 356 Mission. That's me in the green sweater. And I'm kind of blocking the view of Dale, but that's Laura on the far right and Christopher behind him. And then we had this great thing happen last Friday where the Aphasia support group from Cedars and the book club, the Aphasia Book Club from the Echo Park Public Library that spun off during my time at Cedars, all showed up to come and see the show. And we hung out and talked for about an hour about it. And it's been everyone has their own memories of working on it, but it was so great to see these folks again, some of the people that were in the project, but also people who were new, had recently had strokes, and their loved ones and caregivers who seemed to feel like, even though my project doesn't actually tell you a whole lot about aphasia, for whatever reason, they found it very hopeful. And so that, that's always an important audience for me. There's you guys and me and the art world, whatever that means. And then there are the people that are involved in the work. And if it doesn't land with them, it doesn't really feel good for me. So I was happy about that. Okay, the next project I want to talk about, I just want to check on how I'm doing for time, because I tend to, okay, I'm okay. Goes way back to when I was a graduate student at UCLA. It's called Here and Elsewhere. And this is an installation view from a gallery that no longer exists. The building has been demolished, thank God. It was really dangerous, actually. And the film features a 10-year-old girl named Audrey Woolen being interviewed by a voice off camera who is her father, Peter Woolen. And some of you may have heard of Peter Woolen. He's a very well-known film theoretician. He wrote an essay in Screen Magazine around 1970 called The Two Avant-Gardes that was really kind of foundational to me and my thinking about what it means to make avant-garde cinematic work. He was also a filmmaker. But most importantly, he was Audrey's father. And I was essentially remaking moments from a film that Jean-Luc Godard had made, in which he interviewed a little 10-year-old girl named Camille Virolot in 1978 that aired on French television. And so the questions are scripted, but then Audrey's answers are not. And I think the next clip I have is actually from the film. So it's old. You'll see the quality of the footage. It looks pretty dated. It's from 2002, and the total running time of this looping installation is 10.5 minutes, and I've got about a 3.5-minute excerpt for you.
Does your existence depend on your body?
Yes.
So, if you only have one physical body, then you only really exist once.
Yes.
But is your body changing all the time?
Yes.
If it's changing, does that mean there's an old you and a new you?
I guess so.
How can you be the same you? Is it just an idea? You said ideas exist.
I think I'm still the same me, but I'm different, but I'm still me.
What does it mean to remember?
To hold a place or scene in your mind which was in the past.
So can you remember anything? Can you remember the Roman Empire?
No. You can only remember what you see and what you feel and what you touch and what you taste.
Try to remember something. Close your eyes if you like. Are you remembering?
Yes.
When you remembered just now, where did you go? Did you go back in time? Or did the thing you were remembering come forward in time to meet you now?
I think they came forward in time.
So do you think memory happens in the present, or does it happen in the past?
But
If I said, oh, back in the 1970s such and such happened, would you know what I meant? Would you know what I meant by the 1970s?
yes.
What do you see when you try to imagine the 1970s?
I don't see anything. It depends what you said. But just the 1970s in general, I can't see it, but I know there is the 1970s.
What do you see if you try to imagine the 1970s?
I don't see anything.
Was it a long time ago or a short time ago?
Long time ago.
Have you been alive for a long time or just a short time?
Compared to some people, a short time. Compared to some people, a long time. Feels like a long time. Because it's my life, and the year seems to be like so slow, being 10 years old. I mean, if I was 63, I would think it was a long time. Also, if I was 2, I would think it's a long time. It's because, well, in some aspects, I think it's a short time.
And so these are just some stills from the Godard film, from the made-for-TV series. And I guess I wanted to just touch briefly on this project vis-a-vis this theme of the kind of constructed self, because I think I was sort of intuiting something having to do with this back in graduate school. When I saw the Godard project with Camille Virolot, I was really struck. I mean, Godard was like a hero to me, right? But this kid he was talking to was completely unintimidated, totally holding her own, and he would ask her these like difficult theoretical questions. I mean, not theoretical questions, but important, salient questions about the politics of who cleans her room, and if it's your mother, why doesn't your mother get paid? And I mean, all this stuff really turned me on, because in the early 2000s, I'm thinking, like, what happened to those questions that weren't resolved? And aren't mothers still cleaning their kids' rooms and not being paid? But somehow, I think what came through his project, their project, into mine was more the kind of understanding of existence and experience that comes from the outside in versus the inside out. So it is true that she is just an image, and it is true that she is, playing herself and playing a little girl from, 30 years earlier in my film. But it's also true when she says, yeah, that's a confusing question, or it's just that way. Like, she knows what she knows. And I think at a time like coming out of a pretty theoretically driven program, working closely with Mary Kelly at UCLA, I needed to do something that was like grounded in this way, and that kind of reconciled those potentially opposing positions, and was also quite struck by the fact that I realized already, I think, that I was making films and videos and sound recordings of people, and people change, and that self is not always the same self that it was when you captured it. So, this is an example. This is a production still from working on that film, and that's a little picture of Audrey at 10 years old, circa 2002, trying on different clothes that she might wear when we filmed it. And This is Audrey Woolen now, circa 2023. Shortly after we made the film, Peter, her father, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he was very sick for a very long time and passed away in 2019. So I may have inadvertently made one of the last coherent recordings with him. And Audrey developed a rare form of pediatric cancer and lost a couple of years of school, along with a couple of ribs and sensation in part of her body, and had a lot of grieving to do. And as she grew up, at one point we would cross paths again when I was teaching at Cal Arts, and she was my student. And then, we would cross paths again and again in these other sort of iterations of our lives. And I just think it's worth mentioning that there's a beautiful Kari Upson show down the hall or outside in the courtyard. And it was Audrey Woolen who wrote the I think they call it passings, the obituaries that Art Forum holds for people in the art world that have passed. It's really beautiful. She served as Kari Upson's assistant for some time. So, am I still the same me? I don't know. Okay, and another project about memory and continuity, HM from 2009. This is one film that plays through two projectors. It's a kind of documentary of sorts. And when you see the film, you always see the projection apparatus first. So you may not understand how projectors work, but if you look at it, it becomes pretty clear that there's like one piece of film looping through two projectors. And as it happens, the distance between the two projectors, about 7.5 feet, equals about 20 seconds in 16 millimeter film, because in the beautiful world of material film, time and space are kind of intimately related. Longer film, longer time. I won't say much more about the project. I'll just show a clip from it and then unpack it a bit. But you're always seeing two parts of the same film at the same time. It's about a man named Patient HM, true story. You'll hear a little about his story in this. It's about a 19-minute film, and I've got a 3.5-minute excerpt.
During the operation, Dr. Scoville made 2 small holes in HM's skull. Through these holes, he inserted retractors, which he used to lift up the front part of the brain, the frontal lobes. Aspiration requires inserting a small instrument into the intended target and sucking out brain tissue. So Scoville proceeded to remove the hippocampus on both sides, along with cortex surrounding it, areas that we know today are critical for the establishment of long-term memory.
Henry, what are you describing?
A dream you might have.
So you weren't remembering anything just now?
No, it was like a dream.
Like a dream, or was it a dream?
Well, it was like reality, but still a dream.
HM made a good recovery from the operation, but it was immediately apparent that he could not lay down new long-term declarative memories. His immediate memory was fine, but the instant something distracted him, he lost all sense of what had happened just moments before.
We now know that immediate memory lasts about 20 seconds. HM could therefore remember information for about 20 seconds before it was gone forever.
HM remembers all that happened to him up to the time of his operation, but can recall next to nothing that has happened since. Between 1953 and 20 seconds ago, his episodic memory is blank, and that blank space grows longer at the same pace that his life moves forward.
I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. One of my best friends lived across the street from me. Our houses had matching floor plans. We used to walk to school together, play hopscotch together. We even made a walkie-talkie with 2 tin cans connected by a string that spanned the street. My friend told me that her father was a neurosurgeon, but I had no idea what that meant. Do you know how old you are?
I know I was born in 26.
Are you in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s?
I think 40s or 50s, right there on the borderline of that,
Where are your parents?
in East Hartford.
Are they there now?
I think they are.
Years later, I found myself reading about a brain operation my friend's father performed on a young man trying to cure his epilepsy. The operation resulted in the patient losing his capacity to make new memories. My friend's father was William Beecher Scoville, and the patient was H.M.
So, sort of a strange reveal, but I found out the voice that you heard was Suzanne Corkin, who did work with patient HM. She was a professor of behavioral neurobiology, I think, at MIT. It was really her life's work, and it wasn't until she was, I guess, in graduate school that she realized that, in fact, the subject of the operation that her best friend's dad performed was the guy that she was now working with. And I could go into a long story about our differences around, she was great and amazing and extremely helpful for the project. But it's interesting how hard and fast a lot of scientists' understandings of consciousness are. So things that HM would remember from dreams, or say he was remembering from dreams, that sounded an awful lot like the kinds of things you would be thinking before you go under for major brain surgery, like, oh my God, am I ever going to come back? That kind of stuff. She would just sort of discount. So anyway, I'll just go through rather briefly thinking about the different ways in which a sense of identity is constructed, maybe through this project, or that this project is considering. And one is, of course, that we are subjects of history. And it was interesting because a number of the stills I chose were resonant for me, but by the time I made the film, and was showing it to students, nobody remembers Nancy Reagan or Oliver North. I don't know why I remember what Oliver North and Nancy Reagan, but the moon landing, HM didn't know that we landed on the moon. And I wanted to, you noticed that there are these faces and texts that come up, and this is just, I wanted to just suggest also that this was the first time that I'd made a project in which I thought, okay, the subject of the work is being kind of tested and poked and prodded and maybe uncomfortable, and I'm making a documentary about him. That's not really him, that's an actor named Daryl Sandine. But I thought it would be productive to also make the kind of viewer subject to these tests, and how long would it take you to notice, if you ever did notice, that you were actually seeing two parts of the same film? You had just seen something 20 seconds before. Because, of course, we also have about 20 seconds of working memory. So unless something really stood out to you when it was on the left, you don't remember that you saw it by the time it's on the right, which I thought was pretty interesting. So we orient ourselves through language and memory and time and space, and one another. And this is the last body of work that I'll talk about. I'm framing it as the relational self, and it's kind of a narrative component to this. So this work started during the pandemic, which was brutal for me and my family, with the kids at home, and I was not cut out to be a teacher. College kids, fine, pre-algebra, oh my God, can't do that. And we lost our studio, and my mother, who is pretty severely mentally ill and always a lot of work in my life, developed COVID, and and then needed back surgery. And for a while, we thought she had cancer. And it really felt like all I could do was kind of take care of everybody around me. And there were so many people and beings that needed me to take care of them, or so it felt. So I spent a lot of time on Zoom. That's me. And then you can see in the upper right my mother and her social worker, who she has since fired, doing something cute. I don't know, but I'm happy. She looks happy there. Most of the time it kind of sucked. And then, like any sane person living in Los Angeles during COVID, I got chickens. And we called them our analgesic chickens because I would do these long calls with my mom and like FaceTime. And at a certain point, I just couldn't take it anymore. But when you have chickens, you can put the phone up against the chicken coop. And the chickens are so entertaining. They call it chicken TV. And they always made her feel better. So she'd be moaning in pain. You turn on the chicken TV, and they seemed to help. And they were very helpful to me, too. You can see how cuddly I am with them. But as this was going on, my own body kind of started falling apart. I think I was doing too much. And I got this like weird itchy rash on my arms that wouldn't go away. And then I got swimmer's ear, like forever. And I don't even really swim. And when I do, I wear earplugs. And I get migraines, but my migraines started getting really bad. And then I suddenly needed 2 root canals. And they did the first one, and I had like all this pain. And then they did the second one. I mean, it was a disaster. I was in chronic pain. I was debilitated. And I was getting these text messages from my mother. And then my kids were going back to school, and I was getting messages from my kids. And it was like ping, pong, all the time. So I started documenting them. And the continuities and coincidences were amazing. I had double root canal, and my chicken had double bumblefoot, which is this like, it's kind of a great metaphor. They step on something, they get like a little wound in their foot, and it heals over. And unless you excise the thing that they've got in their foot, it festers and turns into an infection that they keep walking on. And so I became convinced that this was like a metaphor for needing to excise all of this shit that was going on and kind of work through it. So I named the show Double Bumblefoot. And I thought about bumbling through language and through life and trying to find one's way, and the doubling. And doubling, as you can tell, is a theme in my work anyway. Looks like I need another root canal. And this one's from my mom. It's not working out with this new person you found. She can't learn. She doesn't know who Ted Kennedy is. I have been doing this a long time, kiddo. I just need the right people around me. It's a refrain I hear a lot. And so my wonderful gallerist, Connie Butler, convinced me that I couldn't hide forever and I should, in fact, show this work and like do a show. So I did a show at 1301 PE called Double Bumblefoot. And it grew out of that kind of in-between position where you have a lot of love and a lot of pain and a lot of caring for people, but then you care for them too much and you need to make boundaries. The text messages were made into these kind of homespun, stencil-y, thick, black works on paper that floated through the gallery like this. And then there was a video called Corner Piece. I didn't bring an excerpt of it, but I think you can get the idea. It's shown in a corner, kind of out of the way, and it just traces real text exchanges that happened between either me and my kids. I'm always blue, because you're always blue when you send a text message, and they're white. And if it's my kids and me, then they're on the left and I'm on the right, because here we read left to right, younger to older, right? And then if it's my mom, then I'm in blue and she's on the right because she's the mom. And they're funny and they're quotidian and they're annoying sometimes. And you find out terrible things like the fact that in the highly gifted public school magnet that my son goes to, an honors biology teacher would tell them they didn't have to believe in evolution. So it's kind of like some of it's kind of dark. And then it's, of course, going throughout the day. It's like pinging, like you're in the gallery and suddenly you're like, wait, is that my phone or yours? Oh, no, it's the art in the other room. Call Kerry, Siri. Hey, God damn it. And then downstairs on the first floor were these large scratch drawings that were based on philosophers' efforts to kind of diagram human temporal perception, as we think of time as a timeline. But of course, it's not really that way. I mean, you could mark historical events one after the other or things that have happened, but the present moment as we experience always includes this kind of long tail of what's happened before and our imaginings of what's going to happen. And so there were 5 of those. And this is where I'll wrap it up. I guess, back to meditation, I think it's safe to say that the present is all that we ever really have as a place in which we can take action or do things. And the notion that each of us is or has a self, and that self is or has a body that's fixed in time and stable and lasting, reveals itself to be a convenient illusion pretty easily. Our children are suddenly no longer children. We find ourselves parenting our parents, who, if we're lucky, do the best they can by us until their bodies, like all bodies, change again and then are no more. And that's it. Thank you.
That was so great, Kerry. I loved your work so much.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure to be taken through a few works that I haven't seen in a really long time, so thank you. I want to start with a kind of a softball question, which is the choice to make video. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about how hard and conservative and awful the art world is at the moment. We are coming out of a moment, or maybe still in it also, where, it's a hard moment, and there's a kind of dominance of painting and other forms. And I was thinking, looking back at some of your work at the 356 Mission Show in particular, about and remembering that there was sculpture there, which I hadn't remembered. So just wanting to ask you about that this return always to the medium of video, and that's a choice that one makes, and that you continue to make, even though you do make drawings and other things as well. But that's the center of the practice. So I wonder if you could talk about that choice.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I was not one of these people that grew up drawing all the time and always thought I would be an artist. There was a moment for me in college when I thought I would really like to make work, but also wanted to really talk about things. And it takes a while to talk about things. And I really admire work that can be, static and maybe two-dimensional and still talk about a lot of things, but I usually don't know how to make that. Usually the two-dimensional and three-dimensional works operate alongside these other kind of things that provide some context. But really, I think it started in college when I was a student of Tony Koch's, whose work I'm sure you know. And he had an incredible class called Problems of Documentary, and I just ate that up. And I realized that, For me, it started with my mother trying to figure out and sort of make sense of her difficult childhood past. And my grandfather was senile at the time and couldn't really answer questions. And there was no way to address any of that, I felt, in a form that didn't take time to unfold and that wasn't happening. I think it's the temporal quality. And also I just feel like, God, it's like people that don't work in time-based media with sound and image, we have so much at our disposal. Like, everything else feels so impoverished to me, So, like, why not? I don't know. But it always felt very natural. And I think I also like to write. I used to like to write when I had time to write. And I think that kind of unfolding and changing over time, there's a kind of a corollary between writing and filmmaking, time-based work.
You said just now in the talk, you said something about, I think you described the worst work as not, I think you said not especially theoretical. And I was thinking, actually the other day, here in this space, we had a wonderful memorial for Silke Otto-Knapp, and Stephen Prina performed, and whenever I see Prina perform, I always think about the kind of aging conceptual artist. And what I love about what he does now is the way that the work has moved from being so theoretically grounded to now this much more subjective, empathic, full of love and emotionality and all these things. And so I guess a question for you, when you said that, it occurred to me that, you studied with Mary Kelly, which you mentioned, and obviously you're someone whose work is really grounded, or was, or is, in theory. But what is that evolution, sort of away from theory, from your perspective, and how would you describe it in the work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think there's two parts of it, and one of them is that for me, when I'm not in a context in which, when I'm not in an academic context, it's really hard for me to sort of keep up. And so I think my work was more probably informed by theory when I was in a classroom reading theory with people, or when I was in a classroom teaching that stuff.
I mean, it's hard to keep up with theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's got time to read anything now? I'm kidding, but I mean, more, I think I grew up a lot and I started having life experiences and caring less about satisfying. That sounds terrible. It makes it sound like people that make theoretical art are just like doing it to impress other people. But I might have been, there was a kernel of that in me, I think, a sense of like needing to cross all my T's and dot all my I's. And I just don't want to do that at all. So what always has been the case for me is like, I have an idea to make something, and then I'm reading something, and I'm like, oh yeah, that totally describes the thing I want here. So for me, theory never came before the work, but it helped me understand my work. So, psychoanalysis was very important to me. Post-structuralism was very important to me in graduate school. Every once in a while, I fantasize about going back to school and having someone brilliant turn me on to all the great, other things that would inspire me. But that's not really the course I'm on right now.
I mean, I wonder if it's because it seems to me anyway, there's a kind of insularity also about the world of theory that doesn't allow for the kinds of subjects that interest you.
Well, yeah, and I really don't, there's like, I love hearing that you liked the work. That means a lot to me. It also is really awesome when like my 15-year-old likes the work. That means a lot to me. It means even more to me when someone that participated in the work that has never seen like an avant-garde art video really likes the work. So I really want it at a basic kind of experiential level to function. I'm a firm believer in the strategic use of pleasure, engagement, and attention. And I mean what I say, that we only live once, and every second that's gone is gone. So all you have to give is your attention. So if I'm asking people to give me their attention, it should be worth it. And and I hope that the audience is broad. On the other hand, I have never made any forays into traditional filmmaking or TV or that kind of stuff. truthfully, a very small audience that I'm reaching comparatively, but the freedom that this audience affords to say, you know what, it's going to be 17 and a half minutes, and it's going to be 3-channel, and you're going to have speakers behind you. Oh, and, you can't do that in other forms. It's incredibly privileged. It's a huge privilege. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, too, about the role of the body. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, that it seems to me that one of the things, speaking about moving away from the theoretical, is that the subjectivity in the work is partly about the problem of the body, and that there, in the texting piece, for example, the bodies are not there. In the Aphasia project, it's about this disconnect, obviously, between the consciousness and the linguistic expression and the body. But I wonder if you could just kind of talk about that, about this, if you're aware of that, this almost excerpting of the body, or the implication of a body that's not there because you're focusing on the language, the consciousness, these other kinds of structures.
Can I answer with a question? Did you used to be a dancer?
Yes.
And how does that, what effect does that have on your... That's not, I'm sorry if that sounds like, I don't mean that sound aggressive, but I'm just like, I felt like I was completely disembodied as a kid. And I have a friend in the audience who used to play sports with me because we went to the same grade school. And now once in a while we play tennis. And I can almost keep up with her. And I've heard her say you should have seen Kerry when she was a kid. She had no idea what she was doing. I felt, and I still often I don't notice I'm holding my breath, or I don't. So I feel personally like myself exists somewhere up here. So that's one kind of answer, which is to say that the self that continues through is an interior, subjective position with some sense of continuity. Its contingency on the body, to me, has always been quite terrifying. I really mean when I discovered that you die, and our kids, unfortunately, had a similar experience when they were little. Each of them in their time shot up in bed and said, but wait a second, you're going to die one day? How do you go through life thinking, recognizing that? So, and then as I, started to understand a little more, for me in graduate school, desire, pleasure, the trajectory of life was framed very much through psychoanalysis, which is still appealing in certain ways, but it really doesn't jive with neuroscience for the most part. And I'm kind of like a hard facts kind of girl and quite pragmatic. And for me, neuroscience is really fascinating. And the fact that, as I said before, this notion that there is matter that becomes conscious and we don't know when or how is just endlessly interesting to me, and all the different expressions that can take, and that it will take in all of our lives. Have you ever had a broken leg and tried to get around? It's a totally different experience. So we should all be so lucky to get old and die, but I don't know. So I feel like it's a very morbid talk. Am I giving a really morbid talk? It's a little depressing.
No, I don't think it is, actually.
Well, I haven't cried yet, so that's good.
We promised that we both would, actually.
Okay, we'll see. I have tissues at the ready.
And I want to also, since we're a relatively small group, open it up for any questions that people have, too. I can keep going, but...
yeah, shoot up your hand if you want to say something. Oh, look, we have a question.
Hi.
Oh, I think we might be bringing you a microphone.
Oh, good.
For the sake of the recording. Someone's coming your way.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask about humor and the role of your work, because it's such a heavy topic, this last work that you were showing, and I think it really heightened it up to have all these moments of humor within it, and then have, the deep emotion that was also there. I wanted to ask about how conscious that is, because you're obviously dealing with other people and they're being vulnerable, and so I just wanted to know if that played a conscious role or if it just naturally happened to be, really funny at different times.
If I'm just naturally hilarious, can't you tell? I'm really glad that you find humor in it. Yeah, I don't really know if I have a good answer for that. I don't think I don't set out to be funny, but I hope that it is. And, you have to be able to laugh at yourself and one another. And one of my really favorite moments in the Aphasia Poetry Club, if you got to see it, is when Chris Riley is trying to name, first he tries to name all the colors he can think of, and then he tries to name all the planets. And he's naming them, and he's like, there's one more. Uranus. And it's so great. And it's like, you don't know, you can't imagine that's coming, but he catches you, He's like one step ahead of you. And I don't know. Yeah, I think it breaks through to something. I think your guard goes down a little bit when you laugh. Yeah.
But I think you also allow for it and make space for it, which I don't think is true of all artists. I mean, I think I want to say something dumb, like a childlike sense of wonder or something. But I mean, you're there observing, and you allow those moments to remain in and remain really central to the work, I think.
Yeah. No, I do. I think my own curiosity drives the work a lot. And then I also just really, I don't want to say I fall in love with people really easily, but I do really like people. I really, really genuinely like most people. And when I get to know them, I get disappointed, but I tend to kind of not always, I don't always get disappointed. No. But I don't know, I don't think that the interesting stuff comes where you're expecting it. So I don't know.
So maybe talk a little bit about, I wanted to ask you something about the kind of, what I think of as the ethics of being the documentarian. And because I think essentially that's the position that you work from most frequently.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned it earlier, going into the poetry club as an observer and staying for weeks and weeks and many meetings, and what were you doing there? And suddenly you're making a work with these people.
Yeah.
And I think you're very aware, certainly, of the problematics of working with people who have a disability. And so just talk about that approach and the ethics of it.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a particularly sticky question. I mean, I framed my proposal to Creative Capital, which funded this project, as these are it's not, the connotation of saying this isn't quite right, but it's an impossible subject, a problematic subject. I'd already been thinking about subjects of documentary, making work about my own family, about my mentally ill mother. You never see her in my videos, but nevertheless, you could figure out who she is. But if you genuinely want to know what someone has to say about not being able to say something about their experience, there's a conundrum there that's just sort of from the get-go. And along the way, I was really, really, really stressed out making that project, and I kept going back to everybody who was involved and showing them work in progress and saying, okay, I know you like it, but does your spouse like it? Does your caregiver like it? Do people that really know you, can you keep it and watch it a lot? And I think I was a lot more uptight about it than they were, actually. That's not an answer to your question. I don't have a great answer about the ethics of documentary. It's kind of, I don't.
But you did say that you didn't, when you started to join those meetings, you didn't necessarily know you were going to make a work out of that,
I
right?
did. I mean, I didn't know what, I just figured if I'm making a project that has to do with aphasia, I need to hang out with people that have aphasia and figure out what it's like. Because I know that when I think, in meditation, sometimes experiences arise that are not linguistic, but very often there's I'm saying things in my head. So even when there's no stimulation, theoretically, going on, there's a running monologue. I'm watching the movie of my thoughts all the time. It's kind of scary up there sometimes. And, but there's a lot of words and language. And so, there's no reason why someone who's had damage to the language centers of the brain would necessarily have any other cognitive impairment. I didn't know any of the folks that participated in my project before they had aphasia, but my sense is that their personalities, clearly is very, very rich lives, personalities totally intact, lots of love, feeling. I do know that patient HM who had his hippocampus removed, it's because of him that we know the hippocampus is responsible for encoding episodic memory. You sleep at night and the hippocampus goes to work and salient experiences become kind of encoded and last. But we also know something about the amygdala, and now you hear about this all the time in popular culture, the fight or flight mode, right? Like when you're stressed out and you start to panic and you're like, why did I blow up, or run away, or freeze, or forget what I was trying to say. His amygdala was also removed, so he was extremely placid after that, and his personality did change. But in terms of were we still talking? Is this question still about the ethics of the documentary? Is that how we got here?
It was.
Yeah. So in terms of that project, I really felt like I was so I hung out with these folks and I kept coming back, and then it was like, that was sort of like, we're happy to do something with you. They saw HM. I was like, okay, here's the thing. I'm not making a straight up like info piece about. No one's going to really learn that much about aphasia. This is not like aphasia awareness. But I didn't, and they were like, we get it. And I'm like, no, you don't really get it. Here, let me show you HM. This is what I really do. And they're like, yeah, we get it, And they totally get it.
Yeah. I love it when she says, I'm aphasic and you're an artist. It's just like.
I know.
Amazing, right. Are there other questions? Yeah.
Nice meeting you.
Hi.
I really, really love your work.
Thank you.
I myself, I'm severely mentally ill and I'm considered disabled. So I really like that you're taking it through that type of space. I'm also homeless right now, and I would say the worst part about it is like when you have to shit, you have to stand up. You can't sit down because the toilet's messy. So there you have it. And I was wondering if I could live with you.
Oh, I've already got a couple of chickens, 2 cats, 2 boys, a husband, a goldfish, a tarantula, some cockroaches, and superworms. So we're a little full right now, but I appreciate your appreciation of my work. And I can't tell if you're, I was gonna say I'm sorry to hear that you're not in a home, but I can't tell from the way I assume you're sorry to hear you're not in a home too right now. Yeah.
I did live with other people. They said I was too psychotic to live with them. And one of the guys there was being verbally abusive. So I feel better being homeless, definitely.
Yeah, I think that I think a lot of times it could be safer to be away from people. Yeah. Well, maybe we could chat a little bit afterwards, and if there's any resources that we might be able to point you to that could be useful, that are not abusive and crappy, could see what we can come up with. Yeah.
Someone else had a question here? Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about meditation and Buddhism being an inspiration for your work. I was curious to know if you draw on any other schools of thought or maybe quantum physics, like the concept of the universe experiencing itself. What made me think of this is you making the parallel between your chicken's double, I couldn't remember.
Double bumblefoot.
Yeah, the double bumblefoot, and then your double root canal.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess there are probably a lot of schools of thought, and I don't think I've ever talked about my meditation practice or Buddhist philosophy in an artist talk before, so I feel a little self-conscious and sheepish about it. But it is just becoming more and more clear to me that if I'm going to make a work that's about not speaking and aphasia, the fact that I regularly do these retreats where I don't speak for periods of time has some relevance. For me, I think there are lots of really beautiful and interesting ideas around what makes the world go round, and I find lots of them interesting. The meditation part of it is like, I think mainly figuring again that it has to do with this idea of other minds. That I spend a lot of time, I think, thinking about other people and how can I impress people and how can I say the right thing and there's not a whole lot of time just being like, okay, what's actually going on in here without all that other noise. I think part of that might be a gender thing. I think women tend to be more gendered to be hyper attuned to everybody else's needs. I think also children of people with borderline personality disorder tend to be pretty highly attuned to the needs and moods of everybody around them. But really, for me, I feel like I was just very lucky to discover early in my 20s a rigorous, systematic practice that asks very little except that you just don't do anything for a little while and pay attention, which is possible for anyone, anywhere. You don't need to be able-bodied. You don't need to be mentally healthy. You don't need to be able to walk. You can sleep. You can meditate sitting, standing, walking, lying down. It's pretty available, so yeah.
I love that, asking that we only pay attention. Anyone else?
Molly Barnes. Yeah, hi, Molly. This was an extraordinary adventure tonight. I don't really have a question, but I'm so impressed with both of you, and loved hearing the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks.
Well, I'd like to just invite you all to join us in the lobby after, and we can continue out there. Kerry, thank you. It's really wonderful.
Connie. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.